as governor, that I'm going to elevate the whole role of economic development that is right in the governor's office. Because when you just assign it to an agency like WEDC, or whether it was Commerce at that point, the fact is, to have significant change in the long term, you have to take this clusters approach that I have identified in my jobs plan. You have to engage education. You have to engage industry. You have to engage the regulatory areas. You have to engage city and local governments as well, and the nonprofit community. So you need to have this be a much higher level than an agency that is over here.
WDC, is that
and
working?
So, no. Absolutely not. If you look at
so would you get rid of it?
No, I'd make it work. And I'm not going to take the energy or the focus off of creating jobs by looking at changing the form. What I look at is whether it's being effective or not. You've seen changeovers in, I think, 8 different leadership hires there. That's always a sign in any organization. If you have that many changes in such a short period of time, something's not working. We've seen them lose track of taxpayer dollars. We've seen recently not even using the funds expended, $30 million that wasn't even used. You see grants being given with no expectation of job creation, not even an expectation of job retention. $6 million and a company can lay off half their workforce. That's not right. So we do, yes, I am definitely going to make
so it's
make
more
changes.
function, not form in your
absolutely.
Yeah.
But then I am also going to have economic development actually have a higher level that has a more encompassing approach to the entire, not only state government, but state organization as well.
If you bring economic development right into the governor's office, don't you have a chance to have pay to play or other bad things happen, that things could be more political if that's the case?
Not in my administration, absolutely not.
How do you avoid that?
It's the tone and the expectations that you set, and I'm going to set the expectations from day one that we are going to be an incredibly high ethics administration. I'm not going to put up with any of the nonsense in terms of that type of thing in my administration. It's just it's the way I have run my life. And it's the way I've run organizations that I have been in charge of, and it's the way I'm going to run the state.
Obviously, Trek manufactures overseas. You want to incentivize companies to bring their jobs back. Have you talked to your brother? Is he going to bring jobs back? If so, how many and where from?
I haven't talked to my brother about that.
Would you try to get them? Do you think they would? I mean, you also have an ownership stake in that company.
I think every company in industry, it's really an industry thing, is different as to whether they can compete with regards to having manufacturing jobs here. And the fact is, Trek does manufacture more bicycles in Wisconsin than any other company manufactures in the entire U.S. And so they have done whatever they can to be able to do that and do it and be competitive. But it varies by industry. I mean, the issues with the bicycle industry is your entire supplier base is overseas. And
is there an industry you might focus on where you think you can bring the jobs back? Do you have one in mind?
I don't have one in mind, but that is the approach that I would take. And it very much fits into the cluster approach of economic development that I've outlined, because that's how you can work, because in many cases it is about supply chain. And it makes a lot of sense, actually. If you can reduce your lead times and the time that you can deliver to your customers, it's a really strong selling point. It's a selling point for companies because they don't have to keep their inventories so high. It's a selling point for customer service because a customer can change their order, or you can deliver on a very short time base. That's a competitive advantage, particularly if all your competitors have long lead times there. So there's a lot of competitive advantages to being able to produce in the U.S. for your customers in the U.S., but it does depend on your supply chain and on the industry.
When you were at Trek, were you involved in any of the discussions about outsourcing?
No.
Not at all, not
No.
once.
My job was forecasting and planning, and it was about what we were going to sell and then being able to manage the inventories.
To follow up on the jobs question again, you've hit Governor Walker pretty hard on his promise that private sector would create 250,000 jobs during his first term. So how many jobs would have been created had you been governor?
Well, I do want to comment on why we mention this, why I
Sure.
mention it is because he made the promise and he said that he should be held accountable to it. And I think any time that you have politicians that make election year promises to win votes and then say they should be held accountable, they should be held accountable. And so that's certainly why it is an issue in this campaign. But regardless of the promise, we're 10th out of 10 Midwestern states in terms of job growth over Governor Walker's term. And so the promise is one thing, but the lagging jobs growth stands regardless of what the promise is. And what I have said is that I'm going to lead this state so we have a top 10 thriving economy. And that is setting a vision. And what we need a vision here. We need a vision for Milwaukee. We need a vision for Wisconsin, and that's what's going to lead us forward. And that is experience that I do bring from the private sector. Trek, a number of years ago, set out and it said it's going to be the best bike company in the world. And that's what they go to work for every single day, and that's what forms the decisions, is how can we be the best bike company in the world? We need leadership that sets a vision for Wisconsin. And that is my vision for Wisconsin. And I have outlined in my jobs plan the metrics that we're going to keep track of, that will be transparent, that will be on a website to say whether we are heading in that direction and what sort of progress that we're making. And that's my promise to
You
the people of
mentioned
Wisconsin.
the Twin Cities, and there's no doubt the Twin Cities over the past 30 years has surpassed the Milwaukee area. Minnesota's done a little bit better than Wisconsin. Why do you think that is, and does it have anything to do with politics, or is it more just a mix of the industries that we have?
Well, I don't call it politics as much as I do call it economic development. And certainly there are things that are specific to the Twin Cities. You can't just replicate and say, well, we can do that here. But you can also look at areas like Madison that have had strong growth rates as well. And what has played into that? The importance of research and the university as an economic generator in that, then being able, and slow, unfortunately it's slower in Madison than it should be, but of spinning out that research and actually creating companies around that. So what we need to do in Milwaukee is we have to understand that we have a strong base in certain areas, strong foundation, but be realistic about what the growth opportunities are in those areas. And any business that looks to have long-term growth sort of understands, if it's in different market segments, which ones are sort of the stable ones, the foundations maybe of their business, but also understanding it's not just going to be it's not going to be one that generates growth in the long term. So it probably motivates an organization to diversify and to look at other areas, look at higher growth areas or industries in order to be able to grow. That's one of the reasons Trek many years ago, I went over and started up the European operations, grew that from $3 million to $50 million, that was a growth area. Well, we have to identify some growth areas here that are the ones that we can generate economic growth from, along with making sure that our foundation is healthy. So we can help spur that through economic development by making capital available, by making sure that we are bringing the type of resources to bear that do that, whether it's an issue of, I think one of the most vital issues for Milwaukee and therefore the state, because I believe that for Wisconsin to be a thriving economy, we need to have a thriving Milwaukee economy, is we have to have the type of community that attracts and keeps young people
All that
and
sounds
families.
great, and but I'm wondering what the expectation ought to be for voters, because everything you're talking about are things that ought to happen, but these are long-term issues. I mean, this could be a generation before some of that growth occurs as you lay the groundwork. So, what's the expectation? What should voters expect in terms of results from jobs from a Mary Burke administration?
I think they can have expectations. Some of them are short-term and some are long-term. But in terms of short-term, we do have measurements, and those are the sort of metrics that I have laid out, whether it's business starts, whether it's the amount of capital that comes in. You look and you see next door in Michigan where they have, they created a venture fund. It's $200 million.
Right.
We did $25 million. It's not going to move the needle.
Right.
You have to put the things in place that are actually going to move the needle if you really want to get results. You look at the area of tourism. Michigan a number of years ago said they couldn't rely on the residents of Michigan to be able to generate the type of tourism dollars that they needed because of the decline in the auto industry. And so they decided to become aggressive about being able to attract tourism from other parts of the United States and then even in the world. And it shows. We're being greatly outspent by Michigan and Illinois in terms of our tourism budget. That's something actually that can have a fairly immediate impact. So there are definitely the short term and the long term. But the voters can expect results on both.